So, the Berlin Wall. It began on August 12th, 1961 to November 9th, 1989, and it was the mark of the communist and capitalist tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States to determine how Europe would be governed. Alright, let's start with the key players. John F. Kennedy versus Nikita Khrushchev, which was during the Vienna Summit and the meeting held on June 4th, 1961 in Vienna, Austria, between President John F. Kennedy of the United States and Premier Nikita Khrushchev of the Soviet Union. The leaders of the two powers of the Cold War era discussed numerous issues about the relationship between their countries, but most importantly, how Europe would be run and questions which would bring the easing improvement of the entire international situation of the threat of the Cold War. So, next we got Lyndon B. Johnson. Lyndon B. Johnson was the vice president of John F. Kennedy at the time, and he really supported JFK in his movement to support the European countries to disintegrate communism and not allow it to spread any further. And he accompanied JFK to Berlin, where President John F. Kennedy gave a speech to the German people to boost their morale, which we will get into more detail later. Second comes Walter Ulbricht. He was a German communist politician, and he played the leading role of the creation of the Weimar era, the Communist Party of Germany, the KPD, and later in the early development of the establishment of East Germany as well. He was the first secretary of the Socialist Unity Party, and as such the actual leader of East Germany from 1950 to 1971. Third is Willy Brandt, and was a German statesman and politician. He was the leader of the Social Democratic Party of Germany, or the SPD, from 1964 to 1987, and the Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany from 1969 to 1974. He strengthened the cooperation of Western Europe through the EEC and achieved the reconciliation between West Germany and the other countries of Eastern Europe. He was the first social democratic chancellor since the 1930s within that era. Fourth comes Erich Honecker. Erich Honecker was a German politician who, as the General Secretary of the Soviet Union Party, led the German Democratic Republic from 1971 until the weeks preceding the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Next is Egon Kretz, the former politician from the German Democratic Republic, or East Germany, who was the country's last leader during its final months of 1989. He succeeded Erich Honecker as the leader of the ruling Socialist Unity Party of Germany. After the German reunification in 1990, he was sentenced to 6.5 years of prison for manslaughter for his role in the crimes of the communist regime. Next comes Ronald Reagan, who we all know for the quote, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." It was a challenge issued by the United States President Ronald Reagan to the Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev to destroy the Berlin Wall. In a speech at the Brandenburg Gate near the Berlin Wall on June 12, 1987, and commemorated the 750th anniversary of Berlin, Reagan challenged Gorbachev, who was the General States of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union at the time, to tear down the wall and halt the spread of communism and increase the freedom of the Eastern Bloc in Berlin. Next comes John F. Kennedy, who we spoke about during the Vienna Conference in Austria, but he also traveled in the summer of 1963 and visited Berlin and gave a speech to rally up the German morale with the quote, "Let them come to Berlin," and the German people took that to "Ich bin ein Berliner," meaning I am a citizen of Berlin and have every right to be a citizen of Berlin. Lastly comes Mikhail Gorbachev, who was challenged by Ronald Reagan. And Mikhail Gorbachev is a former Soviet statesman. He was the 8th and last leader of the Soviet Union, and having served as the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union from 1985 until 1991, when the party was dissolved. He served as the country's head of state from 1988 until its dissolution in 1991. He was titled as the chairman of Presidium of the Soviet Union from 1988 to 1989, and as the chairman of the Supreme Soviet from 1989 to 1990. as well lastly as the president of the Soviet Union from 1990 to 1991. So what happened during the Berlin Wall? Well, the Berlin Wall first was a 13-foot barrier placed in order to split the communist and capitalist tensions and not allow any Western influences to come within the communist regime. So many people were upset about this and they wanted to break free, but there was a shoot-to-kill order given by the communist leaders to suppress this tension and want for freedom. And as well, the Berlin Wall was more permeable from west to east, meaning it was easier to get from the west into the east rather than from the east into the west, because they wanted to keep people out of the west. So that was the Berlin Wall. It was to separate the communist and capitalist tensions and not allow any capitalist influences into the communist regime, so that the Soviet Union could remain in power. So key dates, November 11th, 1958 was when Nikita Khrushchev declared London the Protocol of 1944 was invalid, and the US and France and Britain had forfeited their right to be present in Berlin, and that they had to allow the West Berlin to be independent, or Moscow was going to sign a separate treaty with East Germany and force them to get out, meaning by guns a-blazing, by force. And then on May 1961, NATO had a meeting and they decided that West Berlin should choose their own political system and shouldn't be forced to communism. NATO declared West Berlin should have an allied military presence, and the Western powers should have an unrestrained access to West Berlin through East Germany by air, land, and sea. As well, from 1955 to 1961, more than 200,000 people, mostly skilled professionals, left East Germany annually. East Germany realized it could not survive as a state if its population continued to dwindle. So East Germany began plans to close its borders. In July of 1961, Nikita Khrushchev approved these plans, which began the building of the Berlin Wall. Next comes August 12th through the 13th in 1961. A worker militia and East Germany police had set up barbed wire fence to close the border between East and West Germany in the night. In the next weeks, the barrier was replaced with concrete, which had become the Berlin Wall. In October 1961, American and Soviet tanks confronted each other at Checkpoint Charlie, one of the few crossings between East and West Germany. People feared a nuclear war because both superpowers were on high alert. The Soviets eventually compromised and agreed to allow Western officials into East Germany and stop violating the four-power agreement. On October 1961, East Germans gave into protest by East German cities who demanded greater freedom, and the government enacted a reform. On November 9th, 1989, the East German government announced and revised the version of East Germany's travel law and reduced its border restrictions. At this news, citizens blocked the walls with hammers and forced new openings into the barrier for visa requirements to travel between East and West Berlin, which were waived in December of that year. But passport checks remained in place until June of 1990. So finally, the Berlin Wall, the impact on the Cold War. Well, the Berlin Wall, as we know, split communism and capitalism, which led to these great tensions between the two superpowers of the United States and the Soviet Union, which furthermore led to the innovation of the nuclear warfare or the atomic bomb, because both superpowers were trying to prove to one another, oh, I'm better than you, I have more of this, I can control this. And the Berlin Wall was set to keep out Western influences, which led to the greater political tensions and increased the political tensions of this Soviet Union and the United States within their two ideals of communism and capitalism. And they they fought for the dominance of Europe, and the U.S. fought in order to allow Berlin or East Germany to choose its own government and allow itself to govern itself rather than being forced into the communism of the Soviet Union and be suppressed. So that's the Berlin Wall and its impact on the Cold War. So yeah, it's the best one yet. Woo!